The recent wildfires across central and western Nebraska have created many serious challenges for ranchers, farmers, and landowners. We know that this is a significant issue and there is a tremendous amount of recovery area to cover. We also know there's been a tremendous response. From agencies at the federal, state, and local levels, volunteer organizations, individuals, and many different partners, countless people have stepped in and helped to provide what they can in the immediate term. However, there are still many questions that are practical for the right now. What assistance is available? Where do I start? What should I be preparing for? How do I work through recovery? And how do I make those recovery decisions? Today's podcast will help to answer those questions through an overview of USDA and NRCS resources that may be available following wildlife losses and damages. Today, we are joined by partners from the USDA Farm Service Agency and Natural Resources Conservation Services who work directly with these programs and with producers navigating this here in Nebraska. They will discuss assistance related to livestock losses, grazing and forage losses, fencing, water infrastructure, debris removal, and conservation related to recovery support. They will share guidance on these programs and how they fit into the current wildlife response, as well as what producers should keep in mind as they work with their local offices. Joining us today from the USDA Farm Service Agency is Hilary Miracle, Megan Sunderland, and Dana Ingerson Laws. We will also be joined by Conor Ward from the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Services State Office to talk about the NRCS's role in these programs. From the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, this is Nebraska Farmcast. I'm Morgan Bonifas. Find our farm and ranch management tools and resources on our website, cap.unl.edu. Today we are going to start with Hilary Miracle to talk about an introductory perspective from the FSA office as we talk about FSA programs available.
All right, great to be here. We truly appreciate the responsiveness of all of our partners and the great work that the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, both the Center for Ag Profitability and Extension, have done to partner to make sure we can share this information with our producers. Please know that our hearts and prayers go out to the ranchers, the farmers that have been affected by this devastating wildfire, and that we want to work with you as you determine how to best recover, how to move forward, and what you can do to really make those hard decisions that will affect your family and your operation for years to come. We've also been so impressed by the generosity shown both in-state and out-state with donations. It seems that every rancher I've talked to says my neighbor needs it worse than I do. It shows the true heart and spirit of Nebraska agriculture. So we want to just say thanks to everybody who's made a difference in that. We also want you to know that Nebraska FSA has worked closely with our national office to gain some flexibilities in programs that let you go ahead and start on your work. For example, some fencing before you have the complete application filled out and finished and approved. So work with those local offices because in the local office is where they're going to be able to take each individual farm and each individual ranch, determine which programs work best and if any of those flexibilities fit your situation to go ahead and move things more quickly and efficiently for you. We're excited to have some of our USDA experts here alongside you today to help you understand. We're going to go through about 4 programs, and some of those may work great for you and others may not be the right fit for you. So we have Janet and Megan both that are going to share the information about the FSA programs, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Megan, who's going to kick us off.
Thanks, Hilary. Hi, I'm Megan Sunderland. I'm the livestock program expert in our state office. I'm going to discuss the Livestock Indemnity Program, or LIP, and the Emergency Assistance for Livestock, Honeybees, and Farm-Raised Fish Program, which is ELAP. And then Jana is going to take over for me and discuss ECP and CRP as they're applicable to the wildfire. So the first program we're going to talk about is the Livestock Indemnity Program, which you will hear us call LIP in the offices. And these are benefits to livestock and contract growers who lose livestock in excess of normal mortality because of these events, or they have losses associated with selling those injured livestock at a price below what normal market value is for them. So the keys to participating in LIP is that the livestock have to be maintained for commercial use, or they have to contribute to your commercial operation. So a lot of ranchers out west have working horses that are part of their operation, and those working horses would be eligible as they contribute to that commercial operation. So talk to your county offices about eligibility when it comes to that. That's the big thing. And then the second piece is that those losses have to be a direct result of the wildfire. So whether they died of smoke inhalation, that's a direct result of the wildfire, or whether they were actually lost during the event, that's the big thing. They have to be lost as a result of that wildfire. So those losses have to occur within 30 days of the end of the event. And depending on which fire affects you, the date we use to start the clock is the date those fires were declared contained. So for example, the Morrill fire was the 24th, I believe. Cottonwood was a couple days later. So that's going to vary a little bit depending on the end of that fire. And then again, you have to have documentation that shows that those animals you're claiming were the result of the wildfire. The other thing is that injured livestock portion. And again, they have to be sold within 30 days. And what this looks at is what our national payment rate is for that class of livestock. It compares that to what you actually received for the animal and pays the difference between the two. So that's how that injured livestock portion comes into play with the LIP program. So there's a ton of records that you can use to prove these losses. So what you're going to have to give us for documentation is beginning inventory and any losses that you had, including normal mortality for that year. And like I said, there's a ton of records, and sometimes it takes a combination of these records to get what we need. So if you have, a lot of times we use like the loan or bank records to establish beginning inventory, because a lot of producers will have a balance sheet that shows that beginning inventory, but you might have to combine it with some sales receipts to get to that beginning number. Pictures are a huge thing when it comes to these natural disasters. We prefer you try and take them with a date in there just to show kind of when the pictures were taken, and make sure those pictures show how many are in that and have a decent representation of what kind and type they are. So even if it's pictures of area tags to show that you have different numbers in there, however it works, but pictures are acceptable. Vet statements tend to be really important with these as well. So if you had a vet come look at them, or if they were sick after and died from that smoke inhalation, and the vet can sign off on those. And if you can't find something else, we can always do a third-party certification that somebody outside your operation might have helped you kind of clean up some stuff. There's a very specific form, but they can certify to that information. The timeline to file notice of losses is March 1st. However, we strongly recommend you call the office and at least file a notice of loss as soon as possible, so the office has you on record that they need to make sure they follow up with you. When you call the office and report notice of losses, make sure you tell them what county you're involved in so we can make sure these are in the right county, and who all is involved in ownership of those cattle. So if you 50-50 share them with somebody else, we need to make sure we have both people included on those losses so that we get everybody included. You can call the office, you can email us, you can fax us however you want to. We can take those as we are. So like always, we tell you document when it comes to these LIP losses. Okay, so then the other program that's applicable to livestock owners is called ELAP, and it covers losses that are not covered under any other program. So there's a ton of puzzle pieces under this portion of the program. The basic eligibility is you have to have the livestock not less than 60 days prior, and they have to be grazing animals to qualify for this program. So if the livestock in question are typically in a feedlot and not on grass during the summer, they're not eligible. But if your livestock normally would have been on this grass and grazing animals, then they will be eligible. The other thing is you have to have had eligible grazing land, right? So whether you owned it, whether you cash rented it, however it is, you basically have to show would have had grass to be eligible for this program. And then the livestock, the eligibility is they have to be grazing animals, and the cattle, sheep, equine, and goats is not all inclusive. There's a pretty extensive list that you can ask the county office about. Again, they have to normally be grazed. You have to own them or be a contract grower. And it's the same as LIP. They have to be for commercial use or contribute to the commercial viability of that operation. So as far as what losses this covers, again, I said there's a lot of pieces to this. So grazing losses, which is the actual loss of the grass, the cost of buying feed above normal. So if you have to go buy hay to replace the grass that you lost, if you had feed that burned up in the fire, so if you had haystacks that burned up in the fire, that's the purchased and produced feed losses. the cost of transporting livestock feed. So if you're required to go rent some equipment to get feed to these livestock because of the fire, that equipment rental can be claimed. And then there's the additional cost of transporting water. So if you had to move these livestock or your water system burned up and you're having to haul water, that's eligible. And then the last piece is transport of feed to the livestock or livestock to the feed. So if you're having to bring those loads in and you're having to pay mileage or on those loads, or you're hauling livestock somewhere else because of this fire, the cost that it takes to transport them is eligible. So as far as the losses are concerned, the only portion puzzle pieces for this program that compare each other is the grazing loss to the additional feed purchased above normal. So it will compare the value of your grazing loss to what it costs you to buy feed, and it will pay on the larger of the two. So that's the only two pieces of these that will compare. Everything else, it stands alone in this program. So you might have a grazing loss and a produced feed loss, etc., and those pieces don't compare. These are the only ones that do. So everything else is standalone. So you could get a grazing or feed loss plus the loss of the purchased feed and water transport and livestock feed. The rest of these are all standalone. So as far as what we need, again, documentation is crucial, right? So if you buy feed, keep track of those receipts and bear in mind that there's a minimum qualification that needs to be on those receipts. So who you bought it from, when you bought it, what kind you bought, and what you paid for it. We have no issue if you buy feed from your neighbor or a private party, but you need to list their information on there since they're not a licensed vendor, and they need to sign that receipt so that we know there was a third party involved in that. So you guys can create receipts amongst yourselves. Just make sure all the information required is on there and that your neighbor signs that receipt to show that they sold that to you. So for produced and harvested forage, to prove that you have that, sometimes we have that FSA report, that certification that shows you had interest in those acres. But you can also use things such as seed receipts if you bought forage seed to prove that you had grown that forage and things like that. As for water hauling, what we need to know is start and stop dates and how many gallons of water you hauled. So a lot of times we will see producers make a listing or a diary, but just keep track of when you started hauling water, how many gallons you hauled, and when you stopped hauling. And that's what's important as far as the water hauling is. And then for feed transport, what we need to know is how many head you were hauling feed for, how many loads you hauled, and how much was on those loads, and how many miles each load was hauled. So that's the important documentation when it comes to feed transportation. Livestock transportation is very similar. The only difference between the livestock transportation is we just need to know how many truckloads you hold and how far you hold each one of those truckloads. And you will have to do both of those for this year and what is considered a normal year. And if a normal year you don't haul either feed or livestock, it very well may be zero, but you do have to report a current year and a normal year for both of those. So like we said, documentation is very important for this program. Your local offices can help work through what you need. The final deadline to apply for ELAP is the same as it is for LIP. It's March 1st of next year. Again, it's helpful if you contact the county office and at least let them know you were impacted so they can make sure they follow up with you throughout the year. And these payments can be issued for different impacts and losses at different points in time once we have a full list of rates. So say you lost a stack of feed and you want to go ahead and apply for that purchased or produced feed you lost now, we can issue that payment. And then if you have to haul those livestock later, we can add on to that application and do it at a different time. So stay in contact with your county office because everybody's going to have a little bit different need and timeline for that need as we work through this program. The other program we just want to mention is LFP. And if you guys have seen the drought monitor in the last few weeks, a huge chunk of the state is in D3. For LFP, our grazing season in Nebraska for native grass and improved grasses is May 1st. The important thing to remember is that you can get an ELAP loss for wildfire and LFP for drought on the same ground because they are not for the same loss. So some of these counties have already triggered for small grains. The big thing to remember with both ELAP grazing losses and LFP is that if you enter into an EQIP deferred grazing contract, you can't collect that deferred grazing contract and LFP in the ELAP grazing losses. Now, you can collect the other losses under ELAP. It's just the grazing portion that is not eligible. So when you are looking at these programs, and Conor will talk about the EQIP deferred grazing, and if you have landlords, it's important to make sure the landlords and the tenants discuss these programs, as they will affect each other's eligibility. So that's all I have for livestock programs. So I'm going to turn it over to Jana so she can talk ECP and CRP with you guys.
All right, thank you, Megan. I'm the conservation program specialist here at the state office in Lincoln. I'm going to talk about kind of our structural program that's going to help repair things like fencing, water facilities is kind of what we see commonly with fires. It'll also pay for removing debris. So ECP is a cost share program. We do set national payment scenarios. They're supposed to be 75% is what we're covering of the eligible cost. We do have to consider, is this eligible land? It has to be for ag use. We also have to look at eligible producers. Basically, if you're an ag producer, owner, operator on that farm, you should be eligible to apply for ECP. The whole goal of this program is to get us back to what we were before the fire happened. We want to try to go back to pre-disaster condition. If something wasn't functioning before a disaster, those items might not be eligible. But in most situations, fence was there, it's functioning. We're going to be able to pay cost share to get those back. The water facilities, farmstead, shelter belt, windbreaks, etc. We're going to be able to pay about 75% of eligible costs to replace those structures. A few examples we use when we talk ECP, and you're going to hear these at your local office. These are practices. This is what ECP covers. So the EC1 practice is our debris removal practice. This is going to pay to take out that old fence. So we're paying cost share to remove fence and to replace the new fence. So it's going to include those old fences being taken out. If we had sand, silt, etc. that we're going along and we're having to push that out of the way and remove that debris to rebuild our fence, it'll cost share on those items. Down trees, if a fire killed the tree, fell down, it will pay to get those trees removed also in those impacted areas. EC3 is probably going to be our biggest component when we talk fires in Nebraska. EC3 is going to pay to repair and replace fences both. This is going to include cross fences, boundary fencing, cattle gates. EC4 are our conservation structures. So this is kind of a big wheelhouse of things that encompass conservation structures. But with fires, we're looking mostly at like those livestock watering facilities, possibly some pivots, irrigation pivots out there. And then EC8 is another vital part of the program is field windbreaks, farmstead shelter belts. If we have to restore any of those burnt windbreaks, farmstead shelter belts, those should be eligible also. As of today, we went in because we had such a mass devastation on March 12th. We can go at the SED, the State Director Authority, and implement ECP from Ask National to implement it. Something that normally we do at the county committee level, but in a widespread disaster like we had March 12th, we went ahead and tried to get on top of that as soon as we could and get those counties authorized. I will note Morrill Fire. I know that spread. I know Ashby Minor Fire will be included. I've been working with the county actually, and those will be on that list too. We'll be doing ECP there for those fires. But here's kind of our March 12th fires. These are the big four, we're calling them, that happened on that same day, March 12th, because ECP does run by the day the disaster happens. A few key points we want to keep in mind, just like Megan had with her livestock programs with ECP, there's a lot of policy rules, etc. But Hilary mentioned we've worked since the day after the fires to try to get any flexibilities that we could in place to get this program on the ground and working for you as producers. So normally we have to inspect everything when it comes to ECP. We do have a waiver in place that some work can start without those on-site inspections. Please contact your office. Every situation is different out there, but a lot of this work, if we're staying above ground surface level, essentially, we're not going to have to do on-site inspections. We're going to be able to let you guys go forward with that. We do need documentation. That's kind of our key word of the day. It's document, document, document. Get those photographs. Those photos are going to tell us 1,000 words, right, in a picture. So if we have dated photographs, we're going to need pictures of what that damage looked like before you start the work. It's also going to help us, since we're not doing inspections on a lot of this stuff, to get the repaired photos too. So once the work is completed, to show that work is done, that's going to help us out if we have some dated photographs showing the completed work as well. You do need to maintain your receipts. There has been a big policy change kind of in the positive direction with ECP to help us expedite the program in the last year. We don't have to collect invoices or receipts except for debris removal. But you do need to have all your receipts on your files. It's a requirement that we spot check a percentage of ECP every year. And so you're subject to spot checked. The county committee always has the authority to ask for receipts if they need to verify costs, etc. But for most of these practices we're going to talk about, we are not going to have those receipts turned in. It's going to be a producer self-certification, and we'll be paying on that certified amount and the TSP certified amount. It's also important to know you can get a 25% advance payment. We know with this level of devastation, anything helps, right? So once we approve your contract, if you want that 25% advance payment, it's applicable to every ECP practice we have. Mention that to your county offices. Your local offices should ask you if you want that advance. We do have to have a receipt in that case to show it's spent within 60 days. So once we approve your application, essentially, it would kick out your 25% advance payment, but we do need some kind of receipt that shows that money was spent within 60 days of when we disperse it. Again, we're not going to have to go do pre-inspections as long as it's not an engineering practice. So we rely on NRCS if we do get into some of the EC4 conservation structures. If those need design plans, we do have to get an inspection done before you start any work. So that way we can see what kind of damage is there and what needs done to replace that equipment. Normally, we are not supposed to allow work until you start your application process. So there is a waiver that as long as you're not doing ground disturbing activities, you can go ahead without applying or approval to do those debris removal above the surface, fence repair, restoration, as long as you're staying in the same general location that fence had been in, and any of that hazard tree removal that's above the plow line. It's important to note this is non-ground disturbing. So you can do that work right now without your application, without inspections. The word of caution is if you're going to rip trees out of a tree line, stop. That is not allowed until you come into the office and talk to the local office and get approvals on those kind of items. If you're going to bulldoze the whole fence line, that's also a warning to stop. That kind of work is not allowed because we're getting into ground disturbance. So work with your local counties. If you have questions about that type of work, call and talk to them. But essentially, it's ground disturbance versus non-ground disturbing activities. If you're going to do ground disturbance, you cannot do that work until we give you approval. We also have a waiver for EC4, those conservation structures. Normally, that practice is going to pay to replace an entire structure. Well, with a fire, that's not really necessary a lot of the time. I know out west last week when I was out there, a lot of people don't even know what damage we've got yet on some of these water facilities. But fires blew through so fast. It was windy. So we might be talking like solar panel repair. It might be some wiring, some tubing, etc. So we do have a waiver that we can repair those things instead of replace the whole thing. It's much more cost efficient to do a repair in those cases than try to replace the whole thing. As long as we're doing that kind of work, so structure work above ground, we are not going to have to inspect that. FSA is going to be the TSP for that, which is technical service provider. If you do need to replace an entire structure, we will need to do inspections on those. So let's talk a little bit about these practices. EC1 is debris removal. So as long as you're staying above surface level, again, you can do that work. If we're going to start digging beneath the surface levels, when we need to stop and make sure you get approval first. We are going to need invoices on debris removal with the exception of fencing. It's because we have so many payment scenarios we choose from when we pay for ECP. We need a statement of work so that county can really determine what level of debris are we talking about. And we want to get you guys paid the right amount. So due to the variance in our debris removal scenarios, we are going to need some kind of statement of work showing what kind of equipment was used, how many hours it took to get that debris removed so we get the right payment scenario for you. EC3 is fence. We're restoring that fence to the type and function it was before disaster. I know I've had a lot of questions on, can I do a 5-strand fence? Yes, you can. Our payment rates are for 3 to 4 strand, but you can always go above and beyond. You have to meet NRCS standards for fence if we're replacing the whole fence. But if you want to go above and beyond that standard, that is allowed. It's just important to note that the cost share rate is going to be for that 3 to 4 strand amount. Those fences have to be used for agricultural purposes for ECP. If you do need to just repair fence, those do not have to meet our NRCS standards and specs. So if you're doing patchwork, staples, etc., here and there, those repairs don't have to meet spec. It is a lower payment rate. You only get paid 25% of the full replacement cost, but that's the component we use if it's just a repair and not a full replacement of the fence. There's both options under EC3. And then EC4 are those structures again, probably mainly water facilities. If we do go below surface level, we're going to need to do our environmental review process before you start the work. If we're just doing those repairs, like I mentioned before, we're above the ground level, we're just replacing panels, wiring, etc. Those you can do without an on-site inspection. We will probably need, we're still working, we're tackling this as a new option under EC4. We may need those invoices just to be aware to help determining what payment to get you when we're talking repairs. Because our scenarios are meant for replacement, your local office may ask for some of those invoices just to make sure we get the right repairs covered for you. Okay, so now that I talked about ECP, I'm going to lead into the Conservation Reserve Program, CRP. We do have some flexibilities in place because of the wildfires in Nebraska. We actually started this when Oklahoma had their fires. The national office started expanding those surrounding states to let people donate their hay or their pasture to affected producers. So this hay or pasture will have to go to an affected producer, and our local offices will get a statement or a loss form in the file to show that that pasture or hay goes to those producers that had an impact from the wildfires. There's a few notes on emergency hay and graze because we still have to follow the normal policy. It doesn't change our policy in regards to CRP haying and grazing. It's just that it's opened up the door for more states to use emergency provisions. Usually you hit D2, you're an emergency, but this authorization allows all these other states to open up their acres. In Nebraska, we can't do any of those activities. We can't hay, I should say, during that nesting season, which is coming up May 1st through July 15th. Emergency grazing can occur during that time frame, but we would have to have a 50% reduction in the stocking rate if the county triggered for LFP. The contract holders don't have to forfeit any of those annual rental payment reductions, but FSA does need to issue an approval before the action starts. So if anybody is interested in using that emergency haying and grazing provision, they need to contact their local office before they do the hay or graze activity. They need to show where it's going to occur and notify that office and not start until FSA says, yep, you can go ahead and start the activity. NRCS is going to have to work to look at that contract to make sure it sustains the hay graze activity and make any updates to the conservation plan prior to the activity beginning. I know I fielded quite a few phone calls. There are producers over in Iowa, South Dakota, et cetera, that are interested in the donation. Due to our privacy rules at USDA, we're not allowed to share CRP contract info to other people. So what we're gearing them towards is the NebraskaGrazingExchange.com website. So if you're not aware of that, that is going to be a place to really line up pasture, hay, affected producers, and people that might have CRP that they're willing to donate. So I know if people have called in and talked to me, I gear them to that exchange.com, and hopefully we can get people to line up and get those CRP acres to the right people that need it. And the one last key point I want to touch on is our communications. Our state-facing Nebraska FSA webpage, and we're keeping it updated. Bobby's updating all the wildfire information. You'll be able to get fact sheets, etc., from that website. The other handy tool to stay updated is make sure you're subscribed to get those county office and state office newsletters. So we send out electronic newsletters at both levels about once a month. So watch out for those. Those will contain sign-up information. They'll get you the information you need through farmers.gov.
Now we will hear from Conor Ward from the USDA NRCS Nebraska State Office on information regarding the NRCS portfolio that is particularly relevant during wildlife recovery stage.
All right, thank you. Conor Ward, I'm the Acting Assistant State Conservationist for Financial Assistance Programs with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Just want to briefly go over a couple of the opportunities that the NRCS has to offer for impacted producers out there. First and foremost, our local service centers in the impacted counties and also statewide are available to help you assess damage, develop conservation plans, and help determine which practices can best support your recovery efforts there out on the landscape. We're a technical assistance-based agency, first and foremost. And then I'm also going to be jumping into the financial assistance options as well that we are offering. But just want to put that out there. We are here to help free of charge and provide that one-on-one technical assistance to help you with your recovery efforts. As we know, we had these large impacted acres with the different wildfires, and those are primarily what we're focused on today. But again, we offer this assistance statewide. So with our wildfire recovery initiative, it is through our Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP. We have set aside special funding for wildlife recovery efforts on the ranches that have been affected by these wildfires. I talked about that one-on-one technical assistance. Our field offices are equipped, and we've had a wildfire initiative through EQIP going on the past 4 or 5 years due to the frequent fires that have happened throughout the past couple of years. So they are fairly familiar with working on those impacted acres and working one-on-one with producers. Again, we're coming to the office, meet one-on-one with that conservation planner, and they will help you develop a conservation plan to address your needs. Some of the specifics here on what the Wildfire Recovery Initiative is offering through the EQIP program: conservation practices to help you restore or replace valuable forage resources, essentials for livestock needs. Megan hit on it, but we are offering a livestock deferment payment, a payment to do 12-month deferred grazing or less. That payment fluctuates, of course, based on if you're wanting to do a 12-month or lesser month and defer those acres. Also, we are offering an annual forages for grazing practice. What that is setting aside croplands and planting an eligible annual forage to help supplement hay feed for that livestock that's been impacted. And then we also offer, through our disaster initiative, potential repair or replacement of damaged livestock grazing infrastructures as well. So this sign-up period, it began on March 25th. The application cutoff is going to run through May 31st. We are utilizing an expedited sign-up process that we refer to as Act Now. Traditional EQIP, our sign-up periods for traditional EQIP for different conservation practices outside of wildfire, perhaps. We have what's called a general batching period or sign-up application dates once a year, typically. And then we assess and rank all of those applications once we meet a ranking deadline, and it goes by ranking score. With this disaster initiative, it's an expedited process where it's basically a first come, first serve sign up. So the sooner you get in, the more likelihood of your application becoming funded based on the availability of the funds that we have. Again, this sign up is applicable to wildfires statewide, so not just the 4 main wildfires that we've all heard about in the news and whatnot, but individual fires that have taken place as well could be eligible. Again, the best method to start that process is to contact that local field office, sign an EQIP application or CPA 1200. That local office will walk you through if you need some assistance in signing that. And then we are also, like FSA, offering an early start waiver option to be able to go ahead and begin that practice before we actually obligate your contract. So traditional EQIP, we have to traditionally wait for a contract to be obligated before we can begin the practice. With this disaster sign up, we are offering early start waivers to go ahead and begin that. While the early start waiver does not guarantee you a contract or guarantee you funds, it is a mechanism to get you going as soon as possible. And then with that early start waiver, just to note, to initiate that early start waiver, we do need a letter from the applicant to request that. So again, communication is key, much like FSA hit on their programs. Documentation and communication is really key in getting into that local field office and starting that one-on-one conversation. We're talking about immediate needs, recovery efforts for the wildfire, but I do just want to EQIP itself is a continuous sign-up. So if there are down the road recovery efforts or practices or resource concerns that you have that need to be addressed on down the road due to the wildfires, or really any need at all to address any resource concern, EQIP is there year round. Again, it's a continuous sign up, and we can address those different practices and whatnot that might be a priority later on down the road. An example might be an impacted windbreak that was taken. Just want to highlight the main fires that have taken place. The local NRCS field offices in Ogallala, Oshkosh, Thedford, Alliance, and Bridgeport they are equipped. They are currently taking these applications and doing the site visits and doing the work that's needed to process these applications and get you going. There's no special cost share rates, so to speak, for the disaster initiative, but it carries the same cost share rates, which are available on our public facing website. If you just Google NRCS payment schedules, it'll take you to each state's payment rates per practice.
Thank you to each of our guests for sharing their insight with us today. If you're interested in learning more, make sure to visit our website at cap.unl.edu.